Today's story is all about the Vikings. Now, if you stood in the centre of Waterford City and asked 1,000 people the name of an Irish king, I dare say over 99% wouldn't be able to answer the question. I did a small experiment. I asked 25 people the name of an Irish Viking king of Waterford. The closest anybody got said, I think his name was Eric, which is wrong, by the way, but no, there was no Eric in it. So why is that gap there? Well, it's not the fault of anybody in Waterford, because we probably have the best knowledge of Vikings in Ireland here in Waterford. We've got an absolutely brilliant museum there with lots and lots of artefacts in there. A 3D place down there, which I believe is incredible. So it's not really the fault of anyone, but maybe it's our fault for not asking. So I'm going to answer that question for you today. So 914, as we know, we claim to be the oldest city, founded by the Vikings. But the Vikings were here a lot longer than that. The Irish annals tell us that in 831, there was Vikings sailed up the Blackwater and attacked Lismore. That is the monastery of Lismore. So that's 831. That's a long time before 914. We're told that around 853, three brothers came to Viking brothers came to Ireland from Norway, and one of them was a fella called Sihtric, and he was a fella that founded Waterford. And on we go from there. But we're also going to cover the interaction between the Vikings and the Dacia tribe. Now, there was a lot of intermarriage. I'll give you an example. Queen Victoria, back in the 1850s, when she got married first, she became queen, she got married. By the early 20th century, almost every monarchy in Europe, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Russia, Germany, Yugoslavia, Romania, they all claimed ancestry from Queen Victoria. And exactly the same happened here in Ireland between all the major Viking centres and also with all the Irish kings. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So I also want to talk about the Battle of Clontarf. Now, there's the modern sort of view of the Vikings as fellows who went around with sheepskin jackets on them, these old boots and big axes and a helmet with a horn coming out at each side. Except for the axe, the rest of it is wrong. Because we have a brilliant description from the Battle of Clontarf of what the Viking warriors were wearing, and I'll cover that. So we'll start then at the start. So when did the Vikings come here? Well, when they were building the new road there a few years ago, I think it was 2004 or whatever it was, they discovered an otherwise unheard of. Now, this place didn't appear in the annals of Ireland, no matter how ancient, of a Viking settlement in a place called Woodstown. We don't know the name for it. What name was it? Haven't got a clue. But according to Professor Pádraig O'Corrine of the History Department in Cork University, he reckons that he knows the name of the fella, and he was called Rodulf. And there's a place called Dunrally up in County Laois that's actually called after him. So he reckons that the Longfort, as it's called out in Woodstown, dates from around 850. But I think it may date earlier because of the reference in the Annals of Ulster and the Annals of the Four Masters about 831, where the Vikings sailed up the Blackwater and attacked Lismore. Now, they were great seafarers, and I reckon it was from a base in Waterford that they sailed off to attack Lismore. Now, Waterford is mentioned in another very important Norwegian saga, although it is a romance, and that means it's a story, but it does contain elements of truth in it. And amazingly, and that dates again from around the 830s to 840s, and it mentions Waterford, and it's the only place in Ireland that's mentioned in that saga. It shows the importance of Waterford. Now, as I said, 853, Sihtric is named as the King of Waterford. So, excuse me now while I'm just consulting some of these dates because I couldn't keep them all in my head. In 891, the annals mention a victory by Regan, son of Dougal, in Ossory over the Gael of Portlauriga. Not the Gael, but the Gael or Gael. So that is the Irish word for a foreigner. We also read in the annals of Ulster in 913 of Baird, son of Otter. Otter now again was another very important Viking who was killed in a battle at the Isle of Man by Ragnall on his way to Waterford. 916, Waterford Vikings went to Scotland under the command of Ragnall and Otter. Now these were two Waterford Viking kings in 916, and they were defeated by Constantine III. Both of the Waterford Vikings were killed. 929, Olaf Godfrey's son plundered Kildare from Portlauriga. So there we have another king, Olaf Godfrey's son. In 989, Brian Boru went to war in an effort to establish himself as King of all Ireland, and as among his forces, and who were fighting on the side of Brian Boru, were the Vikings of Waterford. In 950, Ivor was next in succession to the throne of Waterford's foreigners. He was slain in the same year. Now, 994, we have Ragnall, son of Ivor, another good Viking name, was slain by Murka. In 997, we have Ivor, King of Waterford. 1014, Mac Ragnall, son of Ivor, King of Waterford. And in the list of the Battle of Clontarf, now I must explain that at the Battle of Clontarf, the Waterford Vikings fought with the Viking side, the Vikings of Dublin and the Wexford men. I'll explain that a little bit later on. So they didn't fight with Brian Boru as they did on the previous occasion. And we have the names of two Waterford kings who were killed at the Battle of Clontarf. And they were Gostelin Gowl, which means a foreigner, and Ammond, and that was another name. So 1022, Sitrick, son of Ivor, Portlauriga, which was the Irish name, was slain. 1023, we have Reginald, King of Waterford. In 1031, we have Reginald or Ragnall, grandson of Ivor of Portlauriga, was slain at Dublin by Sitrick, son of Olaf. Great story that, I'll tell you about that in a minute. In 1035, Ivor was treacherously slain by the foreigners of Portlauriga, of Waterford. Now, Ivor was a Viking king of Waterford, and he was slain or killed by his own people. In 1037, we read at Tiernock that was a Cúmoon, or the Hound of Munster, was slain by his own people. So again, we have another assassination of a Waterford king by his own people here in Waterford. Now, to get to the Battle of Clontarf, Brian Boru, when he set out to establish himself as King of Ireland, went to war. And what's the best way to describe this now? Perhaps we should talk about Brian Boru for a moment. And Brian Boru married a woman called Grumlia, or Gurumlia. She had been the wife of Olaf, King of Dublin. So anyway, she married Brian Boru, and they fell out, and then she married Malachy after the death of Brian Boru, or well, before the death of Brian Boru. So it gets a bit complicated, because we find the situation that the King of Dublin at the Battle of Clontarf was a fellow called Sitrick. So he was the son of the Irish princess Gurumlia and Olaf. So there was also another son called another Olaf, and he married the daughter of Brian Boru. So this is why I mentioned about Queen Victoria. You have, so in actual fact, Brian Boru was fighting against his stepson, and two of his sons were also fighting against their stepbrothers. So it got very, very complicated. So, but the reason they all got intermarried is because they formed alliances. So the best way is to have, they thought forward, the best way to have an alliance is to give your son, your brother, your daughter, or whatever, and women in particular were like pawns in a chess game. They were shifted around every place. And Gurrenlea was actually the daughter of the King of Leinster. And she married 3 men. She married, as I said, Olaf Curran, as he was called, or King of Dublin. She married Brian Boru, and she married King Malachy. So they were all over the place. So the question is, you know, the modern perception of Vikings, as you see them, as I said, they have the sheepskin coat on them, they have the old boots on them, they have a helmet with 2 horns coming out of either side and a big axe. And as I said, the only real representation of the Vikings would be the axe. The rest is pure fiction. There is a description of some of the Vikings at Clontarf, and I'll read this. They came at the head of 2,000 men, this is 2,000 Vikings, who are represented as hard-hearted, ferocious mercenaries. There was not one of that 2,000 who had not polished, strong, triple-plated armour of refined iron or of cooling, uncorroding brass, encasing their sides and bodies from head to foot. So they were covered in armour from head to foot. These weren't ordinary guys. I said these were guys who knew how to fight and knew how to not to get killed or badly injured in battle. Where did they come from? Well, Sitric's mother, who was this Gurrenlea, after she fallen out with Brian Boru, she was back in Dublin, and she was very upset with Brian Boru because he had attacked some Vikings and some of her folk in Leinster. And she said to the son, well, do you know what we'll do? Send away for as many Vikings as you can and we'll have a go off for Brian Boru. That's exactly what happened. So they sent off to the Isle of Man, some English Scandinavian kingdoms, Snyder Isles and the Orkneys. And they gathered a huge force of all these mercenaries from all around the Viking world. And so, what were the Irish? Oh yeah, on the Irish side, you had Brian Boru, the Dáil Cash, who were Brian's own kinsmen, the men of Munster, some of the men of Connacht. And who was fighting for the Vikings? The Leinster men, the Kinchla, all the Wexford lads, from Wexford up to Dublin. All Leinster were against Brian Boru. So it was essentially a Munster come Connacht force against the North, stayed out of it on this occasion, and they fought against Leinster and the King of Dublin, which was Sitric. So what were the Irish wearing? And all the Vikings, I said, head to toe in armour. This is a description of what the Irish wore at Clontarf. The Irish had white, neat, well-adjusted, graceful shirts. They had on them also beautiful, many-coloured, well-fitting, handsome, well-shaped, well-adjusted, enfolding tunics over comfortable long vests. They also had with them great warlike, bright, beautiful shields with bosses of brass. That's the round part of the front of the thing, was called the boss. And elegant chains of bronze at their side, and that was it. As they were more or less, my generation would say, they were dressed up like Burton's dummies. If you don't know what that means, ask your grandfather or your grandmother and they'll tell you. So they also had on them, the Irish, beautiful crested golden helmets set with sparkling, transparent, brilliant gems and precious stones. They also had with them strong, graceful, sharp, glaring, bright, broad, well-set Lachlan axes, because the Vikings had several names. They were really known as the Lachlan, which is essentially an Irish word for Northmen. And so they had borrowed these axes, the style of these axes, from the Vikings because they were so efficient. And they had with them strong, piercing, sharp-pointed, straight, well-tempered swords, sets here for hewing and for hacking, for maiming and mutilating skins and bodies and skulls. So it was very, very brutal battle. And there's a great story about, as I told you, about Brian Brew's daughter was married to Olaf. Her name was Sive, by the way. She was married to Olaf, one of the son of the Viking king of Dublin. And he said to her during the battle, because the first rush of the battle, all these guys in armour attacked the Irish. And they began to get the better of the Irish. So this Olaf was up on the wall with his wife, Sive, Brian Brew's daughter, and he said, look how the Vikings are reaping the Irish. And she said, wait until the end of the day before you draw your conclusions. So at the end of the day, the Irish were winning the battle. And all the mercenaries ran for the boats. Now, the battle didn't take place in Clontarf itself. It was very, very close to Dublin city, and it could be seen from the walls of the Viking city. And at the end of the day, anyway, the Vikings were running. So Brian Brew's daughter said to Olaf, she said, "Oh, are they running?" She said to the water, more or less to cool off. And she was making a right old jibe at him. So he turned around, gave her a dig in the mouth, and knocked out one of her teeth. As my grandmother say, a lovely fella. And so that was, well, what happened anyway after the Battle of Clontarf? We all learned more or less in school and from songs where King Brian drove the Danes and all that, and that the Vikings were finished. No, the mercenaries got into their boats. They were either killed, or those who were left got in the boats, sailed back to their own countries. What happened to the Dublin Vikings? Well, nothing happened to them. They stayed where they were, and things essentially more or less went on as they went before. Sometimes again they sided with the Irish in a battle, sometimes they fought against the Irish. And then we find a curious thing. In 1169, more or less everything changed. But we find that Reginald, the King of Waterford at the time, was joined by his ally, and that was Mael Shopton or Malachy of Faelón, and they formed an alliance, most definitely through marriage between the Vikings and the Dacia. And the Dacia at that time would have been the O'Bricks and the O'Faelóns, and most certainly they would have married. And they fought against Strongbow and the Normans when they came here. And a curious thing that happened, as time went on, the Vikings were given rights in English law. You could not touch a Viking without being prosecuted under the English law. You could kill an Irishman if you had a dispute with him, and there was no penalty. And we know that from a document that we still have in existence, and that is where an Englishman killed an Osman, as they were called, another name from Osman, and a Viking, a Waterford Viking, and he was taken to court because of killing him. And he said, I can't kill him. He said, there's no penalty. He said, I can kill him. And it was found that in English law, he was protected, but the Irishman wasn't protected. So it's a fascinating story. I'm going to put some reference, some books at the end of the video, and for books to read. They're absolutely easy to read, brilliant books, and I put some links to the annals of the Four Masters. Now all these, you don't have to buy these. These are free on Google Books or on the links that I'll give you, all free of charge. So get to know about your Viking ancestry. Well, I got my DNA done, and I'm very thankful to say, no, I don't have any Norman, despite my name being Power. I have no Norman or no Viking DNA. So, rock and roll, pure paddy. And talk to you in the next one. The next one I'm going to do about the Dacia. Unfortunately, it's all very, very complicated, very difficult to relate it in a little story like that. Like there's so many dates in this. So what eventually happened to the Vikings after the Battle of Clontarf and after 1169 when the Normans came? Well, they essentially assimilated. As I said, for a while they were fighting with the Irish, and they were fighting against the Irish, fighting with the Irish now. And as time went on, they more or less assimilated into Irish society. And by 1600s. They were still around, and well-known families in Dublin with Viking names. They reckon they were the descendant of this Brian Barew's daughter and Olaf I spoke about earlier on. And they didn't go very. What about Waterford then? Well, we still have their place names here. We have Ballytruckle, which is Ballyturkle, or the townland of Turkle. We have Ballygunner, which is Ballygunner, the townland of Gunner, another good Viking name. We have Galtier, which is the land of the foreigners in Irish. So we also have personal names all around Ireland, names like Doyle, Dovedale, or the Dark Foreigner. That's a Viking name. We have MacLachlan, and that means that the son of the foreigner, or of the northern of the Vikings. Names like Cotter, names like Curran. So there's loads and loads of names in Ireland that we consider to be Irish, which in actual fact are Viking names. So they haven't gone. They're still with us in our place names, and they're still with us in our family names. So what in the next time? Slow 'em.